He arrived 2 days early, no warning, just the front door swinging open and his voice calling out like it still belonged here. I was folding his father's shirts when I heard it. That voice. Deeper now. Steadier. Less boy, more man. I'm Delana, and I thought I had my life under control. A calm marriage, a quiet home, and no room for surprises. But then Liam, my husband's son from another life, stepped back into ours. And with just one glance, he reminded me of a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. Curious, reflective, unsettled. Have you ever found yourself shaken by someone you were never supposed to notice? Tell me, what would you do when the line between right and real begins to blur? That afternoon, Elena was in the laundry room, the scent of fabric softener still clinging to her hands, when the front door suddenly opened. No doorbell, no warning. "Is that Mom? At home," a deep but familiar voice called out. Elena froze. The basket of Henry's still warm dress shirts rested in her arms. That voice, it had changed. It was no longer the 17-year-old boy's tone she remembered. It carried a different timbre now, deeper, steadier, unmistakably that of a man. She stepped out of the laundry room just as Liam set his duffel bag down on the gleaming wooden floor. Sunlight from the kitchen window stretched across his shoulders. He was taller than she remembered, his skin sun-kissed, his hair a bit longer and messily tousled with a careless flare. The once boyish face had become angular, his usual half smile still there, but his eyes were different. Calm, and something else, measuring. "Elena," he said with a small nod. "Sorry I came back early." She smiled awkwardly. "It's okay, just unexpected. You've really grown." Henry was upstairs working in his office, completely unaware that his wife now stood face to face with his son, someone he'd only mentioned briefly during a few scattered phone calls. Liam wheeled his suitcase into the living room, glancing at the framed photos on the walls, the bookshelves he might have once touched as a child. But his gaze wasn't that of a returning son. It was more like a stranger, remapping a familiar space, searching for something else in a house that no longer quite fit the past. "Are you hungry?" Elena asked, breaking the silence that had tightened between them. Liam shook his head, then smiled faintly. "A little, if you got something like—" "Of course," she replied, stepping back toward the kitchen. Her heart beat faster, not from emotion, but from a strange, unplaceable feeling creeping in. That evening, they had dinner on the back porch. Henry grilled just like he always did when Liam came home for summer visits. Liam talked about school, about a relationship that had just ended, simply saying we weren't a good match. Elena didn't press for details, but couldn't help wondering who the girl was. Someone like her? Or the complete opposite? Later that night, as Elena passed through the hallway, she happened to glance at Liam's bedroom door, left slightly ajar. Under the soft yellow light, he stood with his back turned, adjusting something in his bag. There was a quiet maturity to his posture she hadn't seen before after a long trip. The line of his spine was pronounced beneath sun-darkened skin, a powerful, unself-conscious motion, pure and unaware of the gaze behind him. Elena quietly turned away, but in that moment, a strange sensation washed over her. Not desire, but a kind of awakening she couldn't name. Like the first soft knock from something long asleep inside her. The next morning, Elena woke up earlier than usual. She made coffee like she did every day, but her hand instinctively placed an extra cup on the tray. Maybe for Henry, maybe for Liam. She told herself that, though the reason inside her wasn't so clear. When Liam came down to the kitchen, his hair still damp from an early run, Elena was standing with her back to him, pouring coffee. He didn't say anything as he entered, just walked over and silently reached for the cup. In that moment when his hand brushed her wrist, Elena felt his presence clearly, not as a boy, but as a grown man. "Still like your coffee black?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Still do." Liam sat down, both hands wrapped around the warm mug. They exchanged a few words about the weather, about how Henry was tied up in meetings all day. But beneath the surface of that casual talk, Elena could feel the small rhythms inside her shift, as if her body was having a conversation of its own, no longer guided by words. Liam mentioned he had dropped out of business school and switched to photography. Elena raised her brows, surprised. Is your father know? Liam shrugged. I'll tell him. Just not today. She nodded slowly. There was something in his gaze that she couldn't turn away from. A touch of conflict, a touch of yearning, but all wrapped in a kind of composure rare in someone of 21. He looked at her the way adults look at each other, without distance, without hierarchy. As she stood up to wash the cups, Elena felt her steps slow. She wondered why she had chosen that thin silk blouse today, or why she had let her hair fall loose, something she usually kept tied up neatly. She had no answer. She only knew that something in the house was shifting, little by little. In the afternoon, Henry called to say he'd be home late. Meetings were running long, as usual. Elena relayed the message with no reaction, but her heart gave a strange, soft dip. As the sun began to slip behind the trees, she stepped out to the backyard and found Liam wiping down his camera on the wooden bench. I've always wondered, she began, when you take photos, what is it that you want to hold on to? Liam looked up. Emotion, not images, a glance, a bit of stillness. Elena sat down beside him, just a wooden plank of space between them. Then which emotions are real? The ones people don't speak of, don't touch, but you can still feel them clearly? Need an answer right away. He simply looked at her longer than a polite glance. Sometimes silence is an answer too. A light breeze drifted by, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. Elena gently clasped her hands together as if trying to hold on to something that had just passed through her heart. She didn't know what to do with it, and wasn't even sure she had the right to name it. Liam stood up then, walking back into the house first. Elena stayed where she was, watching his retreating figure, her heart filled with whispers no one else could hear. That night, she tossed and turned. Amid the sound of Henry's steady breathing beside her, she quietly recalled Liam's gaze from the porch. That look, silent but restrained, as if she were to take one more step, there would be no way to go back to the way things were before. The next morning drifted by in a thin layer of fog, not outside, but inside Elena's mind. Everything unfolded as usual. She made breakfast, cleaned the kitchen, opened the windows to let the breeze into the living room. But inside her, something no longer felt whole. When Liam came downstairs, the scent of toasted bread and coffee mingled with the quiet sunlight pouring through the kitchen window. He nodded in greeting, as if nothing unusual had happened the night before. But Elena still carried that look in her mind, that quiet, deep gaze, as though an entire autumn had flowed through his eyes. Your dad's sleeping in today, she spoke first, trying to keep her tone light. I know, he was working late last night. Liam opened the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, then turned to look at her. Did you sleep well? She paused. A simple question, yet it sounded almost intimate. Well enough, she replied, turning her back to hide the hesitation in her eyes. Throughout the morning, Elena tried to fill the space between them with chores. Dusting, watering the plants, folding blankets on the sofa. But no matter where she went in the house, she felt as if she were carrying Liam's gaze on her back, a gaze that didn't touch, didn't demand, yet lingered hauntingly. By noon, when the two of them were alone in the house, Liam suddenly stepped out from the study with his camera in hand. Do you have a minute? Elena gave a soft nod. I want to try a shot in the backyard. Would you mind being my model for a bit? She hesitated slightly, then followed him into the garden. The sun was at its peak, but the wind was cool, and under the shade of the trees, a gentle light fell like October sunshine. You okay? Liam pointed to a spot beside the bougainvillea trellis. Elena stepped into place. What do you want me to do? Just look that way, like you're waiting for someone. She followed his instructions. Her hands relaxed at her sides, her gaze drifting toward the wooden fence, where Henry used to sit and read every summer. The shutter sounded softly, but sharp as a cut. Liam stepped closer, adjusting the angle, then said quietly, You look different when you're not smiling. Elena turned to him, unsure how to respond. Different how? More real. The answer was simple, but it caught in her throat like a lump she couldn't swallow. She looked away. He remained quiet, respectful, but his presence stayed with her. thoughtful, steady, to feel how thin the space between them had become, like a silence that said more than words. The scent of sun, of old wood, and of him. All of it blended into something she couldn't untangle. "You shouldn't say that," Elena murmured, more to herself than as a scolding. "I know," Liam replied, still unmoving, "but I don't think I'm doing anything wrong. It's calmer here. I don't feel like I'm racing all the time, and I've been living too fast for too many years." Elena closed her eyes for a brief moment. She didn't know what made her heart race like this. His words, the sincerity in his voice, or the fact that she, too, hadn't felt truly seen in so long. "We should go back inside," she said, quickly heading toward the back door. Without looking back, but she knew, he was still standing there, watching her, and a light breeze passed behind her like a whisper from a season beginning to change. Elena stepped into the kitchen, her hand grazing the edge of the chair for balance, as if each step she took was across the surface of a newly thawed lake. She turned on the faucet, washing her hands longer than usual, hoping the cool water would pull her back to the present, to a place where everything was still intact, where nothing had crossed a line. Behind her, Liam's footsteps never came. He didn't follow her into the house. Good, she needed that distance. That afternoon, Henry came home earlier than usual. He kissed her on the cheek, the scent of sweat and fresh-cut wood clinging to his collar, just like always. He laughed as he told her about a worker who slipped and spilled an entire bucket of paint onto the truck. Elena laughed too, a laugh at the right time, the right tone, the kind people share in a marriage long settled into familiarity. "Where's Liam?" he asked as he poured himself a glass of water. "Upstairs, he seems tired." Henry nodded. "He's been staying up late lately. I'm not sure what's going on, but at least with you around, he seems calmer." That sentence pierced Elena like a fine needle. No blood, but a dull, lingering sting. She turned away, reaching for more ice in the freezer to mask the flicker in her eyes. That evening, they had dinner together as usual. Liam didn't say much, but his gaze made it impossible for her not to feel it. Something between them had shifted and was now being restrained by each fork, each crisp slice of toast. After dinner, Henry retired early to bed, tired. Elena stayed behind, washing the dishes. As she dried her hands, Liam walked in, soft as a breeze, strayed into the night. "Let me help," he said, voice low and kind. She shook her head. "It's all right. I'm done." Liam stood there, saying nothing more, just watching her, not with the eyes of a boy seeking protection, but with the gaze of a man trying to understand what was unfolding inside the woman before him. "Were you ever happy with Uncle Henry?" The question came out unannounced. Elena looked up, her eyes widening. "Liam." "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "It's just, I've never seen your eyes look the way they did today. It was different, like something wanted to rise to the surface, but was being held down." Elena leaned back against the sink, the words in her mind tangled, stuck. "I'm not unhappy," she said softly. "It's just, sometimes we forget who we were before we became a wife, a stepmother, a cook, a listener." Liam nodded, as if he understood completely. He stepped closer, not hastily, but without hesitation. "It reminded me of home, the kind I haven't felt in a long time, standing in the sunlight." Elena froze. Her heart skipped a beat. But this time, she didn't look away. Instead, she asked quietly, "What are you looking for in this place, Liam?" He didn't respond right away. Then after a few silent seconds, he said, "Maybe a safe place? Or a face that makes me believe people can be truly seen, not for their roles, not for what they owe, but just for who they are." His answer pained her, not because of the words themselves, but because she too had once searched for that in someone's eyes. But that was long ago. Elena stepped away from the sink, walking past him. "Liam," she said, pausing for a beat, "you're a kind person. Don't go seeking salvation from someone who's forgotten how to save herself." Then she went upstairs, without looking back. But she knew, just like old memories, Liam's face would remain there, forever. like a mirror reflecting the part of herself she had once left behind. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. The ceiling fan spun steadily above her, its circling blades offering no real breeze, only adding to her weariness. Henry lay beside her, breathing evenly, his arm draped across her out of habit. A habit that had become just that, habit, no longer affection. She stared at the ceiling, hollow but restless. The image of Liam in the kitchen returned again and again. His eyes, that question, those words as light as air yet as heavy as stone. Were you ever happy with Uncle Henry? It wasn't just a question that touched her heart. It reached the very thing she had avoided for years. The truth that she had lived safely, but never fully. Near dawn, Elena quietly slipped out of bed, pulled on a thin robe, and stepped onto the back porch. The early morning air was still cool, damp with dew. She sat on the old wooden chair, her palms wrapped around a warm cup of chamomile tea. A soft sound behind her made her freeze. Liam. He said nothing, simply sat down on the stone bench across from her. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the breeze passing through the porch eaves and the quiet thrum of hearts holding words they couldn't speak. "I'm sorry," Liam said softly, "for making you uncomfortable." And Elena shook her head. "It's not your fault. Some things need to be faced so we know how far we've drifted from ourselves." He didn't answer, just looked at her, as though trying to understand every layer she had wrapped around herself. Elena spoke again, slowly. "Sometimes things move us not because they're wrong, but because they awaken something forgotten. You reminded me that I was once more than my routines, that I still carried depth, softness, and presence." Liam slowly withdrew his hand from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table between them. He didn't reach for her, just left it there. A presence, an invitation, never a demand. Elena looked at that hand for a long moment, then placed hers on the table as well, but not touching. Between their hands was a space as thin as breath, enough to feel closeness, yet enough to preserve the boundary. "I won't cross this line," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But thank you for reminding me I'm still alive." Liam smiled faintly with a trace of sorrow. "Sometimes that's all we need." Elena withdrew her hand and wrapped it back around the now cooled cup of tea. In that silence, something inside her felt lighter, not because the feeling had vanished, but because she had chosen not to let it lead her. Gentleness is not weakness. It is the courage to stop when everything could go further. Elena found the small wooden box hidden behind the cupboard under the stairs. That was where she used to keep her mother's old letters, a few unsent birthday cards, and an old photo of herself, young, radiant, standing in a lavender field in Provence, wearing a smile she could no longer remember the feeling of. That morning, after Henry had left for work and Liam was still in his room, she opened the box and pulled out a thick sheet of ivory-colored paper, picked up a pen, no title, no date. Just words written to keep her heart from bursting. "I don't know where to begin. Maybe this isn't really a letter, just a space I need to fill with words so I don't lose myself completely." Be amazing. "Talking to you made me reflect on parts of myself I'd been ignoring for the first time in years. It's not that I want something wrong, not that I'm dreaming or lost, but suddenly I remembered I used to be someone who felt things, who had dreams, who had courage. When I chose this life with Henry, I chose stability. I chose a good, kind man. But I forgot that I, too, needed to live as myself, not just exist as a flawless piece in a family portrait. I don't blame you. I'm not angry. I just want to thank you for quietly touching something that has been asleep in me for far too long. If you ever read these words, I hope you understand. Sometimes respect is in what we refrain from choosing care over curiosity and self-truth over temptation. I won't cross this line, but I will remember what it reminded me of, that I'm still growing, but it was a reflection of something missing in myself, not something meant to be pursued. Elena set the pen down and reread every word. The letter made her heart pound, as though she had just confessed something to herself that she had long been afraid to face, that she had felt something for Liam, not to possess it, but to understand it. She folded the paper, slipped it into an envelope, no name, no stamp, then placed it back in the wooden box beneath the old photo of herself. She wouldn't send the letter. It wasn't necessary, but writing it helped her face herself more clearly than ever. A soft breeze passed through the window crack. A small note fell from the table to her feet. On it, in Liam's familiar handwriting, "I'll be leaving this weekend. Thank you for listening." Elena nodded to herself gently, as if she had just heard both of their hearts speak. That afternoon, Elena drew back the kitchen curtains, letting the late-day sunlight spill into the quiet room. Inside, only the steady ticking of the wall clock remained, along with the soft chirping of sparrows outside on the porch. Liam had packed up almost all of his things. A small suitcase sat neatly in the corner of the foyer, as silent and composed as his presence had been throughout his stay. Henry was still not home. Elena opened the door leading to the back porch. She stepped out, carrying a freshly brewed cup of herbal tea, then sat down in the familiar old wooden chair. The same chair where, years ago, she used to read books to the neighborhood children. Now it was just her, and the amber sky exhaling with the evening. The glass door behind her opened softly. Liam stepped out, silent. He sat down on the chair opposite hers, saying nothing, but Elena knew that was his way of saying hello. A light breeze stirred. Leaves rustled. The air between them was no longer taut like a wire about to snap. It had softened, like two people who had weathered a storm together without ever naming it. "I'll leave early tomorrow," Liam said, his voice quiet, as if afraid to disturb the stillness wrapping around them. Elena nodded, her hand tightening slightly around the cup now growing cold. "I know." A pause. Then Liam continued, "I wasn't going to leave anything behind, but I ended up writing something. Not for anyone to answer, just to leave a trace. For myself." She didn't ask what it said. She didn't mention the letter she had once written, still tucked inside the box beneath the stairs. She knew some words didn't need to be exchanged to be understood. Liam looked out toward the distant trees, where the sun was slipping behind layers of cloud. "I've never felt seen the way I did here," he said slowly. "Not because you did anything, just because you were present." Elena felt a tightness rise in her throat. She turned away, afraid her eyes might let too much spill out. "Thank you," she said, and even she was surprised by how gently her voice trembled. They sat a while longer, neither saying another word. Only the wind rustled through the porch and the light shifted from gold to violet. That kind of light you only really see when your heart has grown still enough to notice. When Liam stood to go back inside, he paused for a moment, as if wanting to say something, but instead he simply tilted his head slightly, in place of a goodbye. The door closed behind him. Elena remained seated, alone, but no longer feeling empty, because she knew that moment on the porch between two once-lost souls was real. And sometimes the purest light arrives in the late afternoon. The next morning, Elena woke up earlier than usual. The early sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, casting a soft glow across the edge of the blanket. She turned, reaching out to gently brush the pillow beside her. Empty, but no longer the cold void it used to be during the early years of Henry's frequent absences, or in those recent mornings when she woke in a fog of uncertainty about herself. In the kitchen, the kettle began to whistle softly. She made a small pot of coffee and gazed out toward the front porch, the place where, last night, Liam had passed for the last time. He had left behind a folded letter, placed beside the cup of tea she had forgotten. Just one simple line. "Thank you. I don't know where I'm going, but because of you, no, I'm no longer running. Elena tightened her grip on the paper, as if it were the last thread connecting her to a feeling she hadn't yet found the words for. She didn't cry. She simply exhaled. The kind of breath released by someone who has just untangled a knot buried deep within their heart. She carried the letter into the study. By the window on an old bookshelf, she tucked it between the pages of an empty notebook, one meant for things never written down, a silent but vivid symbol. By noon, Henry came home from the office earlier than usual. He set his briefcase down and wrapped his arms around Elena from behind, a hug that was no longer stiff, no longer unconscious. She smiled and gently rested her head on his shoulder. "Liam's gone?" Henry asked, not with suspicion, just simple concern. Elena nodded. "This morning, I think he needed to leave, to find himself." Henry sighed and gave a quiet nod. "I hope he'll be okay." Elena turned to face him, looking straight into his eyes. "What about us, Henry? Will we be okay?" He didn't answer right away, but the way his hand took hers, held it firmly, that was the answer. That afternoon, they went out together, not to anywhere in particular, just a slow drive around the small town. Down tree-lined streets, past familiar houses with early spring flowers blooming in the gardens. Elena looked out the window, her heart calm. There were things she couldn't name, couldn't retell, but she knew they had awakened her, not because of temptation, but because of the clarity brought on by a woman who had once lost herself within her own home. Elena didn't need promises. She didn't need a storybook ending. She only needed to live truthfully. And today she was doing exactly that. A single early autumn leaf drifted down onto the windshield. She smiled gently, as if welcoming a new season in her heart, where silence, contradiction, and longing had finally found a place to bloom. There are boundaries tested, not because we deliberately cross them, but because life sometimes stirs things within us we've never named. Elena's story is not about right or wrong. It's the awakening journey of a woman who had forgotten herself beneath the weight of familiar roles. Sometimes the person who unsettles us most isn't someone who walks into our lives, but the long, demurring part of our heart that suddenly stirs. And to grow, to hold on to what is right, we must have the courage to step back, not out of weakness, but because we've come to understand deeply enough. If you've ever found yourself quietly shrinking within your own home, ever felt lost in the face of an unexpected emotion, share your thoughts. Don't be afraid of fragility, for sometimes it is exactly where a new season begins. What do you think helps a person return to themselves after walking near an invisible line? Leave your reflections below.